Since I am Izzy Lawrence, and opposite me in the universe of the internet, because that's how we record this, we're not in the same room, we're COVID safe, is the magnificent Dr. Dave Hone.
Hello. We're COVID safe apart from having both had it.
Yeah, shh. Don't tell everybody our secret. We're fine now. Everything's fine. We're not panicking trying to get all of this done really soon when we said we will, because we all had a couple of weeks off. I actually only had a couple of weeks off. Dave was ill for longer. But don't worry about that now. We are both fine. Dave, are you fine?
Well, the doctor said another 2 or 3 months and I should be back to normal.
It's fine. I'm editing out all the coughs. It's good. We hope you are safe and you are well, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about one of the tragedies that COVID has caused in the world is that all the cinemas pretty much shut, and so we cannot go to the cinema and watch movies. But in many ways, I think that Dave would be quite pleased about this, because Dave is very judgmental when you get onto the topics of film.
No, that's not fair. I'm judgmental about everything.
Including film, though, Dave, because every single time we talk about semi-lunate carpals, you spit at Steven Spielberg's name and curse him and throw salt and all the rest of it. The subject of this podcast is going to be how movies ruin the world and our understanding of dinosaurs. I mean, what are the common misconceptions that people have due to, let's start with it, let's go Jurassic Park.
Yeah, and we've mentioned it multiple times. I mean, I've got a book that I'm writing at the moment, and one of the comments that's come back from the book publishers is, you mention Jurassic Park too often. And it's like, well, I'm trying not to. But if you're writing a general popular science book rather than something that's dedicated for, already dinosaur lovers or dino nerds, that is the single touchstone that almost anyone who ever looks at the book will have. That is their perception of dinosaurs. They may have seen other documentaries and they may have seen other dinosaur movies and yada, yada, yada. But if there's an instant, what is their picture of dinosaurs? It will be Jurassic Park. And you cannot avoid that in any way, shape or form. For better and worse, obviously for worse, it carries a whole bunch of baggage with it. But at the same time, for better, it's easy. Even if a touchstone is wrong, if everyone has that same mental picture, you can at least say, think of that, like that, but. Whereas starting from scratch is often really, really hard.
Imagine a wood pigeon, but evil and bigger.
Yeah, and with longer legs, and the arms don't fit like that, and then the tail would need to be over here, but only, and it all gets very complicated. That's why I don't know any dinosaur educator who does podcasts or blogs or public talks or anything like that. You kind of sick of Jurassic Park because you can't not bring it up. And even if you don't, you will get questions about it constantly because it's the one frame of reference that absolutely everyone has.
Not the sitcom Dinosaurs.
No, not as much.
Because that bothered me as a kid, not because you had a load of dinosaurs wearing clothing, but only the top half of clothing, etc., but also that the mother and the father were different species, and they had a herbivore daughter and a T-Rex
There was
son.
a ceratopsian, yeah. It was all very, very strange.
What I liked about that, though, that introduced me to the subject of tar pits, because I didn't know what a tar pit was until I saw that sitcom on video, because I'm that old.
Yeah, I was going to say, it was quite a while ago. Going back to Jurassic Park and its impact, what people forget is there was another film in the cinemas at the same time as Jurassic Park based on genetically engineered dinosaurs running around and getting out. This is Carnosaur.
Carnosaur? No, I've not seen Carnosaur.
Just like Jurassic Park, Carnosaur is a book which actually predates Jurassic Park by quite a few years, I believe. And they genetically engineer birds and reverse engineer them into dinosaurs, and then they get out. It's actually set in the UK. It's set in some farmhouse. But it was made into a film which stars Laura Dern's mother. So both of them were in dinosaur films at the same time in the cinema. But yeah, there were loads and loads of films alongside Jurassic Park and pre-Jurassic Park. That is one which I think became, it was almost like Star Wars in the sense that absolutely everyone went to see it. Me as a kid, I liked dinosaurs, I liked animals, I did like movies and I liked stop motion and animation, I was into that. So I'd seen all of Ray Harryhausen stuff. I'd seen 1 Million Years BC, and I'd seen terrible things like The Land That Time Forgot with Doug McClure, and all of these kinds of things. But, you know, your average person probably hadn't seen those.
And if they had, they'd have seen the skeletons fighting. They wouldn't necessarily have seen all the dinosaurs.
Yeah, they'd probably have seen Jason and the Argonauts being the more popular, or Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger, and some of his other genuinely more famous stuff. And there was things like...
The Wrong Trousers isn't him, is it?
No, that's Aardman. But I'm thinking of things like there's a film called Caveman, which stars Ringo Starr.
What?
Yes.
Well, the thing about being a caveman is...
Well, none of them speak English. They all speak in kind of grunts and groans, except the Japanese caveman, who bizarrely speaks excellent English, and no one can understand him as a result. It is a comedy, strangely enough. It has a T-Rex getting high on weed and then falling over. But there was loads and loads and loads of stuff out there that the only people who saw it were dinosaur nerds. And you look at some of Ray Harryhausen's stuff, and even, we're talking about 60s here, 60s, 70s. It was very accurate for its time, as in up-to-date science, in terms of its depictions and its style, and the animals were quick and running around and agile and could jump and were, they were not...
lumbering.
Godzilla-like, upright, tail-dragging, very slow, cumbersome animals. Again, for people who really knew their dinosaurs, yes, Jurassic Park was something of a leap forward in terms of the technology, because they used the computers and then the absolutely giant animatronics. But in terms of doing like super accurate dinosaurs, I would argue it was not a massive leap forward from stuff that had been around 15, 20 years ago. The big difference was the size of the audience that saw it.
Because it's Spielberg.
Well, right, and it's obviously a very good film, and it made an unbelievable amount of money. And part of the reason it looks so good is because it was a massive Spielberg production, and they could put a ton of money into it. Carnosaur, in contrast, which literally came out like a week or two before, there's some clunky rubber puppets that don't move very convincingly a lot of the time.
I mean, the reason it's so good cinematically is because it's not about dinosaurs. It's about a man learning to be a father. And the dinosaurs really are window dressing. It's
a very Spielbergy film in that regard. It's about family and all of that. And actually the book, so I had cause to reread the book fairly recently, and it's notable how little the dinosaurs are actually in it, how little Crichton actually says about dinosaurs. He's really not interested in them. He doesn't give great graphic descriptions of them. He doesn't talk about their biology or the science at any great length. What he's really interested in is systems going wrong and Ian Malcolm getting to be a smart arse and talk about how he saw all of this coming because he's so brilliant, and how things will inevitably fail and man's hubris, which is what a lot of Crichton's books are about. And I don't remember that reading it the first time, and obviously the way the film is interpreted by people is, yeah, dinosaurs, which is of course what you want, because no one wants to go to the cinema and watch 20-minute monologues by a bloke in a fever dream on a bed about how he's right, whereas mostly Triceratops and Tyrannosaurus are a bit more interesting on film.
If you want a really good monster film, I recommend, I think it's Night of the Big Heat, which is, it's Cushing and Christopher Lee,
right,
in this amazing thing where they're actually filming it in freezing conditions, but it's meant to be a really hot, thing, so it's getting hotter and hotter and hotter, and for whatever reason they filmed it when it was absolutely freezing cold, so they're all sort of shivering, going, gosh, I'm hot. But the main thing is, the monster doesn't appear until like 5 minutes from the end, and you're terrified at that point because the acting is genuinely very good and the directing is really very good. But then the monster turns out to be a bin liner, and
does it rather lessen the tone?
It is a scary trash bag on the floor, kind of flat and moving across the floor, and you're not in a sort of Dementor in Harry Potter way either. Really, just a bin liner. But yeah, so I think that is the big impact of film. It isn't so much the nature of the dinosaurs that we remember as much as the look of the dinosaurs. Yeah. And what I remember from watching the documentaries about Jurassic Park is how they moved away from dinosaurs being reptilian. They were going to give the velociraptors flicky out tongues and that sort of thing.
Yeah, they didn't, because that's a lizard thing. That's the one thing that Crichton does emphasise in the book, is that he says, rapid, fast, fast, jumping, climbing, running, intelligent. So he does angle that, and that perhaps gets more attention in the book than it does in the film. But obviously the flip side of all of this is, as I said, it's now become a kind of idée fixe in the idea of people's minds. This is what dinosaurs are. The gap between Harryhausen's dinosaurs and the first Jurassic Park is the same as, or in fact less than the original Spielberg Jurassic Park and the Jurassic World sequel, which will be out in a year or two. And yet, the Jurassic Park dinosaurs haven't changed. So we've had 25, 30 years of scientific discoveries and improvements to our knowledge and understanding. The first Jurassic Park film came out before I went to university. And I've now had a PhD in dinosaur biology for 12, 15 years. That's a pretty big gap. And so you imagine just how much we've learned and discovered, and that depiction on film hasn't changed one iota.
But that's because you're looking at universe building. See, I am professionally a writer of fiction, historical fiction, but still, you can't just go changing it all because they found, a new bit of science. You've got to keep the dinosaurs nudie-roody without any feathers.
I totally get and understand that. I'm perfectly capable of watching those films and turning my science brain off and going, yeah, it's film, I don't care. Were it not for the fact that they themselves have repeatedly edited their dinosaurs between films. So the claim of the filmmakers is, oh, well, of course we haven't put feathers on T-Rex or Velociraptor because it's the same animals. Only they've put teeth in the ornamimosaurs between films. The stegosaurs, they've drooped the tail from being upright to dragging along the ground in later films. They've changed the colour of them. They put those little erectile pseudo-feathers in the Velociraptors in Jurassic Park 3 and then got rid of them again. So the pteranodons have changed quite a bit. So they've repeatedly edited their own animals and then claimed that they can't change them. And so from that point of view, that argument really doesn't stand up. And it's also true that when the original film came out, you can see there's the PR and the press release stuff, and there's little clips of these online. People like Spielberg, Sam Neill and Laura Dern saying, it's all super accurate. We've done loads of research. We've made every effort to make these as scientifically accurate as possible within the context of making a movie. And that hasn't carried on.
I'd argue that even like in the later Jurassic Park films, when they are saying, we're genetically updating these dinosaurs and we're creating dinosaurs using different DNA and what have you, the actual argument that the filmmakers are making is that this is a really bad idea, but they're having to do this because it's what the public expects. And you've kind of got this narrative going through it going, we actually don't want to be making our dinosaurs like this. We want to be making them natural, but we can't. It's actually part of the plot of the film.
But that's the thing. They've got themselves into a logical tangle whereby originally they say, we can't, this is in the book, and I don't think it makes it into the original film. But in the book, there's a clear thing where Henry Wu, the big geneticist lead, his plan is he wants to cull everything in the park and rebuild them slower and more lizard-like, because that's what the public will think the dinosaurs are, and so he wants them to meet the public's expectations. And yeah, we're now in the inverse position where the filmmakers are refusing to update them because the public's perception based on their own films alters things. And there's that. So for people who are not in the UK, for whatever reason, over the Christmas period, basically every Jurassic Park film was on.
Being eaten is Christmassy. Is as Christmassy as Alan Rickman falling off a tower.
Yeah. So all 5 of them have been on, and several of them more than once. So I haven't been re-watching them because that would imply sitting down and watching them. I've had them on whilst doing other things. And there is that line in Jurassic World, I've got to get the right one, where they're talking about this very issue when they first make the new one. And Henry Wu, again, says, you've got to understand that these are recreated animals, and if we were able to do this properly, or you would travel back in time, a lot of these animals would look very different to what we've actually made. And everyone treated that as the filmmakers trying to have an excuse and say, well, yeah, you can argue that they're supposed to have feathers, but as he said, we haven't got the proper DNA. They're kind of genetic monsters, so They're not real. And that excuse would fly were it not for later on in the movie when you see Dr. Wu's secret little lab and he's got a lizard with feathers on it. If you can make a lizard genetically engineered with feathers, I'm pretty sure you can make a velociraptor which had feathers genetically engineered to have feathers on it.
I'm just going to take this opportunity for paleo artists out there. Well, you're drawing your velociraptors with feathers. Can we, and you get them lovely on the ulna, you get them lovely on the forearm. Can we also have them on the hand, please? Because birds have the hand ones as well.
There's a habit of having almost like, well, as you see Hoatzin, so the famous South American bird, which as babies have these kind of little claws on the hands. That's how people often incorrectly draw Velociraptor and the other dromaeosaurs and other bird-like dinosaurs of like there's a wing all the way down the arm until it gets the fingers and there's just a reptilian hand at the end. And no, yeah, just like modern birds, those feathers continue onto the fingers. You know, the claws would stick out and some of the fingers would stick out, but yes, they would still be very feathery as well.
You'd think it'd be very annoying for them because they'd have to clean those feathers a lot. I understand. Anybody who's worn elaborate cuffs, if you're Lawrence Llewellyn-Bowen, think that when you're designing your velociraptors, please. Can we have them with, you know, the full-length sleeve? Otherwise, they're just going to look, you know, unflamboyant. They were flamboyant. So other than the look of a velociraptor, what else? I mean, what are the big misconceptions? Let's go through the big misconceptions that we get from Jurassic Park.
Well, so, I mean, the absolute classic one, which I'm not sure if we've ever talked about. This is the problem, of course, because we both know we talk about lots of stuff that doesn't necessarily
And also, we talk when we're not recording. This is the issue that we have.
We don't always know if we said it and recorded it or we recorded it and then edited it out and God,
exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, but T-Rex's vision is based on movement. That's, you know, an absolute prime one. And obviously a key plot point in the original film, because that's how they hide from it, and then they distract it with the flare, and absolute nonsense. There's no reason to think that whatsoever.
I mean, could you tell that anatomically anyway? Is that something that you can tell with animals?
So in the book, Crichton says this comes about. Actually, I think it's in the sequel book. So in the Lost World book, he said it comes about because there was a paper that described the brain cavity of Tyrannosaurus that showed that its optic bulbs, so the bit which would control eyesight, were similar to those of frogs. And frogs do have super reception for things moving. That's why they're really good with shooting tongues out and grabbing stuff. But that's not the same as not being able to see. The idea that frogs can only see things that move. It's like, how would they ever operate? I mean, you've got to be able to see other things as well.
Otherwise they go walking into walls all the time.
Yeah. Secondly, most animals have bits that are really attuned to move. I mean, we do it all the time. You can be having, you say, oh, I think I saw something out the corner of my eye. Things moving, particularly at the edge of your vision, is the kind of thing that makes you look around.
Even a very average human being, say George Bush, he can get out the way of a flying shoe faster than anyone.
Better than you'd think, absolutely. I'm not aware that this is a real paper. I mean, Crichton is, I'm not going to say guilty because that implies he's done something wrong, but lots of the science in his books is made up. So like he talks about a whole bunch of fossil plants and diseases and stuff in the first book. None of them exist. He literally just made up names that sounded good. So I've never come across this paper. So I am not aware that there was ever a scientific paper that said tyrannosaur brains are like frog brains for their eyes. Even if they did, there's no reason whatsoever to think that they've got some weird supervision-based movement and can't see anything else. Because frogs don't have that. And also, even if they had a brain that was a bit shaped like a frog, they're still a dinosaur. They are a very, very long way evolutionarily from frogs, and lizards and snakes certainly don't have this. Why would you think that dinosaurs did? So it's a absolute nonsense in just about every way. And the related one is that T-Rex has the greatest sense of smell ever, which I think we have touched on.
We did talk about that in the T-Rex episode. We talked about how it's the cavity for the nose is in people that have his brain cavity or something.
It basically got confused with the sinuses. They do have a big olfactory bulb. They had a good sense of smell, but the idea that there's some ultimate sniffer dog that can smell absolutely anything a mile away isn't true.
And they had those massive eyeballs.
Yeah, a big eye is one of the things in biology that we really do know with great confidence. Really big eyeballs correlate with really good eyesight. That's not movement-based vision in any way, shape or form. That's the kind of interesting thing that I find as an educator and someone who does like films in general and does like dinosaur movies, and I've watched a lot of schlocky dinosaur movies deliberately, is that there is this weird mix where the T-Rex is probably a bit fast, probably very fast, and it runs straight through a tree trunk, which, if it tried to run through a collapsed tree, the T-Rex would break in half before the tree would shatter. That's just cinematics. But on the one hand, it was very accurate for its time. There's stuff in hindsight we would probably say is now different.
Like what?
So we would now probably say that they had lips and that they didn't have all their teeth hanging out. The eyeballs are a bit shrunken into the head. The shape of the top of the snout is probably wrong. We've got a better idea of some of the scale shapes and patterns on different bits of the animal.
I have an issue with some of this, though, because, you look at... Because I really like the look of the T-Rex in the Jurassic Park films. I think they look scary. I think they look cool. I think, weirdly, they have a lot of expression. And then you look at what happens when you give a T-Rex lips, and you give it... And it just becomes this amorphous blob of a head. It's got nothing in it, because the muscles aren't there to sort of give it a wink or a smile, and you never see them sort of doing duck face or anything. They always look at... A paleo artist who does a really accurate one is just this big loaf of bread. It doesn't look very exciting.
Yeah, they're a giant block. Yeah. With the benefit of hindsight, with another 20 years of research, we would tweak. There's a few things at the time which were probably arguable or are subtly wrong, like their arms are rotated wrong, but they're not the big velociraptor giant grabby arms and opening doors. They're tiny tucked away little bit of the animal. It doesn't have a proper pubic boot, so the big bit of the pelvis that sticks down doesn't really stick out properly at all, but you often don't notice that until you actually really think about it. But in general, that big CG model and the giant full-size animatronic that they had on set that was moving around and grabbing stuff is really very accurate. It looks like a real animal, but it also looks like how good artists and scientists would have interpreted T-Rex at the time. And then they give it these bizarre, it can't see features, which it's kind of interesting and weird, because on the one hand, I totally understand it's film, it's fiction, you're trying to do things that are interesting and exciting, and you want to drive the plot and have dramatic moments, and that can be incompatible with good science. And yet, if you're going to do that, well, why don't you throw the whole thing out the window and do whatever the hell you want? And they seem to be stuck in this weird limbo whereby they're trying to make it as accurate as possible when they accept right up to the point where they don't care at all.
I sympathise with this, though. What I really liked about it, I think, though, one of the things I really admired about the T-Rex was they didn't make it run. It is walking the way you say, I think, yes. Almost always, which allows it to not only be scary and chase things like cars, but also a lady in high heels to be able to run away from it quite easily.
I'm told by a colleague who, I don't think I'd break any secrets if I reveal his name, but I won't. A colleague who was involved in one of the later Jurassic Park films told me that he spoke to the animators of the original, in particular, the original sequence of the T-Rex running down the road after the Jeep with them sitting in the back and, the famous objects in the rearview mirror shot of it getting close. And said if they made it run, it looked weird. And so they had it this super high speed walk. The thing is, apparently, if you actually measure it on screen, if you use some markers, you know roughly how big the animal is and therefore how long its strides are, you can work out how quickly it's moving. If you do that, you find out it's actually going about half as fast as the Jeep. It's all an editing trick, because they discovered that if they made it run at 40 miles an hour to catch the Jeep, the legs are going unbelievably fast on this giant thing, and it looked ridiculous.
If only it went me at the same time.
So what they did is they've slowed it down. It's doing 20 odd miles an hour, which is pretty quick. So what you see is it cuts to the T-Rex running along the road, and then cuts back to the Jeep, and then cuts back to the T-Rex, and it's much closer. But the actual bit where you see it, it's running about half as fast as the Jeep. It really shouldn't be catching it up. I mean,
Crichton's famous for not liking systems. All you need to do there is just have a Jeep that has got something wrong with it, that can't, stuck in second gear or something.
Can't go very quick, yeah.
Exactly, then it's perfect.
A slow speed chase. This was a discussion I had. There's a paleo artist called John Conway, who at least some of the listeners will know. John and I had this conversation, I think at his birthday party a few years ago, and we wanted Spielberg to remake Duel, his famous film of a big rig truck basically chasing a car across the desert, with a modern T-Rex and a person, because the T-Rex is just this big long-distance runner, but that's not actually very quick. So, a couple of marathon runners in the desert with a T-Rex is a fairly even fight. And that would be a much more interesting and horrible film for an hour and a half. This T-Rex just coming down the road after you, not getting tired.
Yeah. What about all the herbivores in Jurassic Park? 'Cause they don't get that much attention. Are there anything that strikes you as really wrong with them?
Well, so the Stegosaurus, I mentioned that earlier. The Stegosaurus has had a bit of a weird lifetime. So Stegosaurus first turns up in the second one, The Lost World.
Can I just ask very quickly? Stegosaurus, they are Jurassic.
Yeah. No, they're late Jurassic.
Okay, cool. They're actually Jurassic, not Cretaceous, so they should be in the film.
Yes, they're one of the rare Jurassic dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. So Stegosaurus first turns up in the second film. There's the little family group. We don't know anything about their social dynamics, but it's plausible. It's fine. And there's supposedly a mum and dad and a juvenile. And they're huge. They're about like 50% bigger than they should be. So they're absolutely enormous for no good reason, because they're big anyway. I mean, it smashes things up with its tail and the people have to run away. A big Stegosaurus that's pissed off and swinging its tail around is very dangerous. You don't need to make it colossal for no apparent reason. But apart from its size, the model is absolutely superb. It's about as good a dinosaur as they ever made in terms of its accuracy.
Why did they make it so big then? And how big were
I don't, because most of the skeletons are in the US. I've seen original Stegosaurus skeletons, but I don't think I've ever stood next to a really big one. We've talked about this a bit with dinosaurs. This is one problem we have with our perceptions, even my perceptions. I don't mean that in an arrogant way. I mean, I've seen an awful lot of dinosaurs, and
you climbed inside a T-Rex.
I have. And I fall foul of this trap is that, their sizes ranged enormously. You look at crocodiles, you can go to a zoo and you can see a 3.5 metre long crocodile and go, oh my God, that's enormous. Yeah, but there are 6 metre crocodiles out there, which is just so much bigger. And it's a similar thing. Like, I've stood next to Triceratops skulls and gone, wow, this is a big animal. And then I've seen photos online of one literally twice the diameter, literally twice as long and twice as wide. And you're like, oh, I thought that was how big they got. They get that big. So I think a big Stegosaurus, you would be, well, we're about the same height, but, we're 6 foot, we're fairly tall people. The top of our heads would be getting up to the top of their thighs.
Wow.
Maybe 8 feet, so 2.5 meters to the top of the pelvis, because, of course, they've got this very kind of semicircular shape almost. And then, of course, you've got the plates on top. So they're really still, 3 meter plus animals to the top of the plates. But these ones, the people are coming up like halfway up their knees. They're like 3.5, 4 meters tall. So they're really quite too big. But apart from that, they're brilliant. And then Stegosaurus next turns up in Jurassic World. They might have, because there's some fleeting cameos, they might have a fleeting cameo in the third one, but they turn up properly in Jurassic World. And they've moved the tail down. So Stegosaurus, we think, has this very kind of horizontal tail, so parallel to the ground. And now they've got it as like a 1960s tail dragger. They've actively changed that model and brought the tail swooping down and almost dragging along the ground. So the size is now right, but there's no reason for that profound shift in body shape, except to make them look more like the average bad kids' dinosaur books with a 1960s reconstruction in it. Which is therefore a great example of them mucking around with the models for their animals that they can't change for because they want to be consistent, except they're not consistent. They're actively making them more wrong.
But then the argument in that film is that they're deliberately making the animals more attractive for tourists. So maybe that's the reason they've actually bred the Stegosaurus to be like that, or genetically altered them. Except
that literal popular real-world culture has changed because of the depictions in earlier Jurassic Park films. There's a massive recursiveness of real world fiction interactions going on. That's
well, maybe they were sick. I mean, I know when my cat's ill, they don't do the happy tail, they do the sort of slightly sad tail.
Sad, draggy tail.
What about the big sauropods in Jurassic Park? Are they relatively accurate?
So the original Brachiosaurus is the one that you first see at the top of the hill is very good. It then cuts to a shot of several of them walking out of a lake where they'd have floated because they're somehow submerged, which isn't very good. And then again, they're barely in it. You get them feeding in the trees later in the first one. They're barely in it again until we get to Jurassic World, where there's a Mamenchisaurus, so the really super long-necked one, which I think we have mentioned from China, turns up in the second one, in Jurassic Park 2, and that's actually pretty well done, but you barely see it. They kind of drive past it in a motorbike, and that's about it. And then you get multiple shots of the big apatosaurs and diplodocids in Jurassic World, and they look awful. They look like these horrible elephant-skinned, wrinkly things that look like honestly, they look like the Peter Jackson King Kong, where he said he deliberately made them look like the original ones. And I'm like, so they look like they're from 1933. That's fine in 1933, and that's fine in 2005 or whatever it was. If you're making an homage to 1933, it's a bit rough in 2015 when you're saying that they're accurate. They just don't look like real animals. But there's also, saying on herbivores in general, there's this thing, certainly in Jurassic World, where, they've got like the giant glass hamster balls that people are driving around, and they've got like the petting zoo. And it's all these herbivorous species. And people are walking around freely with them,
including ankylosaurs, I think.
Well, yeah, or driving around their little. And okay, there's supposed to be an armored glass dome, but you have the shot of people literally paddling a canoe down the river with all of these dinosaurs lining the banks, and even a couple of them like swimming past, and you're like, that's ludicrously unsafe. You're.
I mean, hippos kill a lot of people. That's hippos.
Well, right, but it's. I think it goes back, and this. I'm slowly making my way back to your question. I think this goes back to this perception people have that herbivores are basically safe because they're herbivores, and carnivores are basically dangerous because they're carnivores. And yeah, if you want to know what frightens locals in South Africa, it's hippos and water buffalo rank so far above lions, it's untrue, because they're so unbelievably dangerous. I've worked with a Noah, so these are dwarf buffalo from Sulawesi, and they are one of the most dangerous things I've ever seen. I've worked with peccary. Those
are pigs, aren't they?
Yeah, South American pig. Again, I spent about 6 months in Peru doing conservation work out in the Amazon basin. There are jaguars down there. There are puma. There are anaconda and torpedo rays and piranha and all kinds of lethally venomous snakes and spiders and all kinds of nasty ants and stuff.
I don't think spiders are going to try and catch you and eat you, though.
No, but there are you've got to be very careful where you put your hands. Yeah. There's things like tangarana trees that have these super nasty bullet ants that live like yada yada yada. The one thing the locals are afraid of is peccaries, these knee-high pigs. Because they run around in big groups and their default to everything is attack. That is literally their defense. If they are nervous or worried about anything, they charge and attack. And that's it. And the locals are understandably terrified of them. And I worked with some of them at London Zoo. And yeah, they were absolutely unbelievably vicious. And pigs have really nasty teeth and really strong bites. And the idea that, yeah, they're knee high, but the idea that like 15 or 20 of these would come at you, you're dead. You've just got no hope whatsoever. And so, yeah, just this, all the dinosaurs are just there with the people. It'll be fine. They're herbivores. No. Yeah, some of them will be placid. I've worked with some there's a thing called bongo. These beautiful big orange antelope. I've worked with giraffe. They are genuinely placid animals. If you are used to them and you've worked with them and the animals themselves have had that experience, it can be very safe to work physically with those animals inside the same enclosure.
I mean, elephants, they're dangerous, but they're very, placid.
Right, but sadly, keepers are still killed semi-regularly by elephants, and these are experienced people, and yet killer whales, who are killer whales,
dinosaurs who eat meat, and they don't seem to attack humans very much, and the ones who do are just incredibly, they're usually, in captivity and very stressed out.
In the wild, generally not. In captivity, yes, as we've discovered, they have a track record of it.
They're a bit stressed out and go bad, because
individual animals have different personalities. I've worked with Arabian oryx, and most of them were fine, but one of them just attacked everyone because that's what that animal was like. And so, yeah, even if you've got a relatively placid species which is used to being people around, it's clearly a very, very bad idea.
I would not go anywhere near an ankylosaur. You just wouldn't.
Yeah, and the other thing is just accidents happen. The safest, most placid, nice animal in the world can unexpectedly have a bad day or get a bee sting on the bum or just slip and fall. Cows slip and fall over. What do you think happens when a bloody sauropod that's 30 tons slips and falls over next to the people who are just canoeing past? It's like, no, don't do that.
Okay, I want to ask finally about, I think it's a Jurassic World thing, the sort of, I don't know if it's a plesiosaur or what it's meant to be.
Oh, the giant mosasaur, yeah.
Yeah, talk to me about that.
The big aquatic one.
What is that?
Well, so it's a mosasaur, so we haven't done marine reptiles.
Not yet. Well, we're hoping to do a marine... Special.
Marine reptiles are a long way out of my normal area, so we'll wait till we've got someone else who knows a bit more about them. So mosasaurs are big marine reptiles. They're not dinosaurs. They're quite distantly related. We have good reason to think they're actually not just lizards, but specifically close to monitor lizards. Ooh. So they have a deep evolutionary history, which is tied to a specific branch of lizard evolution. And they're very, very big. They have 4 flippers.
Are they as big as they are in that film?
That one in the film is about twice as big as it should be. So we have some bits of giant mosasaurs. There were lots of big mosasaurs, and I mean seriously big, T-Rex-sized swimming mosasaurs, absolutely, with, great big heads with great big teeth. So they have very big heads. So there's actually literally dozens of groups of aquatic reptiles at various times, including in the Mesozoic. The 3 big ones, which everyone's vaguely familiar with, is ichthyosaurs, which basically look a bit like dolphins, but their tail goes sideways instead of up and down. Plesiosaurs, which are the stumpy body with a great big long neck, which we're going to have to reference Loch Ness Monster-y type animals. And then the mosasaurs are the big-headed, almost like a crocodile, but kind of with flippers rather than legs. That's a terrible description, but big head, big body, not especially streamlined compared to the other 2. And these are interpreted as like big macro, they're shark / killer whale type things that are going after other big animals, so either big fish or other marine reptiles and stuff like that. There's lots of them. We've got an excellent fossil record for them. We've got them with embryos inside. We've got them with skin and various other things. There's some really big ones. There was one that came up, I think it's from Svalbard, which had a documentary made about it.
That's a cold place to dig. I know we were talking.
It is.
We've talked about this will come up, because this is the thing, I don't know when it will be, but we've talked about you and your pants. In your pants. I think that was with Adam Rutherford, so hopefully we've already done the image of you. You couldn't dig in Svalbard in just your pants.
And some sandals and sunglasses. No, probably not. It would have to be a...
Magnificent, the wonderful. She's a hero of mine. She writes books. She's an actress. She does everything. It's Emma Kennedy. With all of that, hello, Emma Kennedy.
Oh, hello, Izzy Lawrence. Hello, Dave.
Hello.
How are you? I'm almost bursting to ask my questions about dinosaurs.
Well, before you do, I want to know if you, because I know you're quite tomboyish in your own little way, because you love Lego, and I love Lego.
I've got 4 Lego Velociraptors.
Have you?
Excellent.
Have you got the big Jurassic Park gates?
No.
You should get that.
No, I haven't done that.
I know someone who does.
It is good. It is very good.
For people who are not live in this video call, Izzy is waving and looking guilty, but that doesn't translate well to audio.
True. However, so I mean, does your passion for dinosaurs lie beyond Lego?
Well, I wouldn't say I have a deep relationship with dinosaurs, but I'm a great fan of the Jurassic Park films. And I have such a vivid memory of sitting on the front row in an Odeon somewhere in London. I think it was in North London somewhere, and seeing Jurassic Park for the first time. And that moment when they arrive on the island and they see the big dinosaurs for the very, very, very first time, and I can remember just literally going, "Holy!" It's like you couldn't believe it. You couldn't believe it, because at that point, dinosaurs in films were rubbish. They were like the old King Kong movies. They were made of plasticine or whatever. And did not look real. But the thing that Jurassic Park did that was just like, it was like your eyes getting a Christmas present for the first time. It was like you really genuinely felt you were in a cinema seeing something that hadn't been done before, and this was the first time it had ever happened, and that was Jurassic Park.
So shall we ruin it for her, Dave? Shall we spend or shall we ask her a question?
If I'm allowed to ask my question,